Hi, guys. Welcome to another episode of Living Life at Life U. I am your host, Dr. Veronica Garcia, and today I am joined by a very inspirational piece of the university, Dr. Brent Russell. Hi, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
It is an honor to have you. Thank you for being here. So, Dr. Brent, talk to me. You've been around the university for quite some time.
I graduated from here in 1983, but I've been on the faculty most of the time since 1984.
Wow. What have been your evolutions and your roles before we get to the piece of where you are now?
Well, I started out as a faculty clinician. I did that for 9 years.
Oh my gosh. I didn't know that.
In the time since 1984 when I started, I've been in full-time practice for a few years there, but most of my career I've worked for the university.
Yeah.
After being a faculty clinician, I taught classes for many years and have been involved with the research efforts since 2001.
And you are an essential piece in our research department. What is your role right now?
Well, I work for the Center for Chiropractic Research, and I do a lot for them, but I'm also the chair of the Research Ethics Committee, which is called the Institutional Review Board. I am one of the co-advisors for the research track alternative curriculum for the university, which involves a competitive application program by students. I serve on the Research Advisory Council, which determines funding. I'm a member of the Research Leadership Council, which is mostly administrators looking at overviews of the university's research, and probably something else I'm forgetting right now.
Impressive. So if you're not the qualified person to talk about research, I don't know who will be.
Well, somewhere in there, I'm supposed to actually do research as well.
which you do, and it's really awesome because I think that a lot of the research that, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you've been bringing out is a lot of on mobility, and it's more towards that chiropractic piece of it. So what is that niche for you?
Well, I'm the team leader for a research team called the Art of the Adjustment. And our overarching goal, I think you could say, is might be to have a database of what chiropractors do, what constitutes an adjustment. When an expert chiropractor performs an adjustment, what is that? So mostly we're concentrating on motion and force in terms of adjustment. So if a chiropractor performs an adjustment, how much force is involved being delivered to the patient, and what kind of motions are involved? And here, I'm not really talking about the intervertebral motion, the fine, subtle details of what happens between two vertebrae. It's more about what kind of motion does the chiropractor undergo in terms of changing postural positions?
Okay.
And also, what type of motion is the patient experiencing on a broader scale? And I'm going to center on the cervical spine for that. When an adjustment is done to the neck, how much regional motion takes place in the cervical spine is the thing that we've put the most study into, and which we've actually won an award for studying as well.
Congratulations.
So force, when we do an adjustment, we are delivering a controlled amount of force in a specific direction, except that the way students learn that is a lot of it's by subjective interpretation. A faculty member might say, no, you need to thrust harder, or no, not so hard. And that advice might vary from instructor to instructor.
Right.
And there's not much in the way of objective measurement of how much force is being delivered. But we do have some equipment, and that sort of effort is increasing every year within chiropractic research, ways to measure force in research, but also within the classroom. So we have a force plate or platform built into an adjustment table. We just have one because a force platform costs $10,000
only.
And we're in the process of acquiring flexible force sensors that would measure the force directly coming out of a hand.
Wow.
We have 5 small sensors now, and we expect a larger one within the month.
That's amazing. That is so interesting because I think that even me from the standpoint of having been a student not so long ago, I did encounter a lot of that. And I always, now that in the position that I am as a faculty clinician in the student clinic, right? It's really important to also just be a little bit more objective with the students without telling them just a little bit deeper or a little less deeper or whatever the conversation is.
Beyond the educational aspects, questions about force have safety implications
Absolutely.
for the profession.
Yeah.
There are people out there claiming that we're using excessive force and injuring patients,
Mm-hmm.
but they're not looking at any actual data. It's just their subjective
Interpretation.
prejudices and
Yeah.
interpretations. So, studies of cervical spine adjustments, manual adjustments, despite the fact that some people say we're causing strokes with those things,
Mm-hmm.
the research on forces delivered to cervical spine disputes whether it's enough force to cause a strain or tearing of vertebral arteries.
Wow.
So the research doesn't support those kinds of claims.
That's amazing.
And there are people who think that it's horrible that chiropractors are adjusting children.
Uh-huh.
Well, do they know anything? Have they looked at any research about that?
Mm-hmm.
There's only one study that has looked at the amount of force used in adjustments of children.
Mm-hmm.
It's in our favor. It doesn't look like chiropractors are using a lot of force.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Even the intuition of and the training that goes behind just becoming a chiropractor to be able to, with all that training, putting it together and delivering the adjustment. And now you're doing the piece of just, this is why it's working. This is the proof of it. It's simply mind blowing.
Well, we're mostly interested in measuring what chiropractors actually do.
Right.
Not really in the position of telling them what they should do.
Right.
Because first is what are we actually doing?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Again, force and motion.
Mm-hmm.
There are some perceptions out there, largely by people who've never been to a chiropractor,
Mm-hmm.
that when we do neck adjustments, the stereotypical lie face up, I'm going to adjust your neck this way. There are people who think we're like twisting the neck excessively,
Mm-hmm.
but there's only been one research study measuring the amount of motion that happens during a supine chiropractic neck adjustment,
Mm-hmm.
and that was done here at Life University. And we found that the average neck adjustment turns the neck 32 degrees.
Wow.
Plus or minus 10 degrees
Yeah.
across several 24 adjustments, I think we measured.
Wow.
But it's not a head spinning exorcist sort of motion like some people think.
Yeah.
Perhaps.
Yeah. We see a lot of times and sorry to interrupt you. We see a lot of times in those movies, those action movies, the giant twist and the crack and the, oh my gosh, the person's dead.
Yes. Well, that's not what we do. Obviously.
Not at all.
We've also done a study on the subject of motion. We've done one study with human adjustments. We've done a second study in which students and faculty members, experienced chiropractors, performed cervical adjustments on a mannequin,
Mm-hmm.
and we got pretty much the same results as on humans.
Wow.
The other motion studies we've done so far have had to do with measuring chiropractors' body positions during performance of adjustments.
Mm-hmm.
We've published one study on one chiropractor performing 10 side posture adjustments on patients, and we measured her spinal motions from setup to thrust, looking at how much cervical, thoracic, and lumbar rotation, lateral bending, flexion, extension occurred.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it's documentation of what actually occurs during an adjustment.
Mm-hmm.
We are currently working on writing up a study of a senior year 14th quarter student performing a supine cervical adjustment on a mannequin.
Mm-hmm.
And we're the only people who've ever done anything like that.
It's amazing.
So again, it's all about documenting what chiropractors do, and for the future,
Mm-hmm.
educational purposes or comparison, a professor or a student can look at the at what's been recorded in the past and
Mhm.
as a reference, not necessarily as a rule that this is the way it must be done, but
Mhm.
as a reference.
Mhm. And it's really important work what you're doing for that for the growth of the profession and like you were mentioning just for the future itself. And with all that growth, you were also involved in a huge piece of this institution, which is PAT. Talk to us about what PAT is and how did it even start?
Well, PAT is the mannequin that I've referred to a couple of
Hmm.
times, and PAT is an acronym for Palpation and Adjustment Trainer.
Hmm.
When you think of mannequins, I mean, we think of the hard plastic things in department stores,
Hmm.
but Pat is very lifelike in terms of adjustments. Pat
Yeah.
is lifelike. Size, weight, density, compressibility. Pat's
Hmm.
not a hard plastic thing.
Hmm.
Um, Pat Pat has 3D printed vertebrae, plastic molded skull, 3D printed pelvis. They are all connected together with wires and bungee cords, um, and a lot of ways to kind of make the spine flexible
Hmm.
and mimic human motion. As students, we buy these plastic spines for $100 or a couple $100, and they
Hmm.
don't really move like spines do.
Right.
But Pat does because a lot of study was put into how the vertebrae connect with each other.
Hmm.
Pat has cords that can make the spine stiffer or less stiff,
Hmm.
depending upon what you want the student to experience. Um, Pat basically does two things very well. One is that allows you to perform repeated adjustment thrusts.
Hmm.
So if you're going to be good at performing adjustments, you need to practice those adjustments over and over and over again,
Absolutely.
just like you would an athletic skill or if you're learning a musical instrument.
Absolutely.
But if you're trying to learn how to do adjustments on humans, you get like one or two tries, right?
Right.
But Pat, you want to practice an adjustment setup, you can thrust 30 or 40 or 50 times in a row, and Pat never complains. Pat
Mhm.
never says, dude, that hurts.
Mhm.
Pat, is ready for more.
Yeah.
And so I've seen students go to Pat and try to perform an adjustment thrust and just look awkward and like they've never done it before, which
Mhm.
maybe they haven't.
Mhm.
And, within 15 or 20 minutes, they look like a pro because they
Yeah.
get a chance to work out their coordination, their
Mhm.
body mechanics, develop some muscle memory.
Mm.
So they get a lot of that stuff out of the way by the time they get to humans.
Mhm.
So the human is less of a guinea pig because Pat has done that job.
That's awesome.
Pat also contains 64 pressure sensors at various bony landmarks. And so, when hooked up to a proprietary software program and a monitor, we can ask a student to palpate the spinous process of L4, and we can look at the computer monitor and we can see
Were they?
whether they're on the spinous of L4 or the mammillary process of L2 or the
Yeah.
PSIS or wherever.
Wow.
Um, and we've seen this is something nobody ever had before.
Mhm.
We have shown we showed one of our PAT prototypes to an experienced faculty member who proceeded to palpate the mammillary processes of the lumbars out a couple of inches from where they actually are
Wow.
because the doctor never ever had any feedback. So
Right.
you guys who have access to PAT, it's a new era, truly. So we have sensors on the external occipital protuberance of the occiput, the inferior angles of the scapula, the PSISs, and all the
Mhm.
cervical spinuses and lamina pedicle junctions and so forth, and
All the anatomical bone marks.
all the major anatomical landmarks are there.
That's
So it's
amazing.
it's instant feedback, particularly valuable to early quarter students who are
Absolutely.
just learning.
Absolutely. Well, that's so amazing. I am so grateful that you were involved into the creation of PAD because I know that my experience as students we should have definitely been so different from what it is now to have that experience to just practice those thrusts.
Don't let it sound like I created PAT, because I'm a minor player in the development of PAT. I've ended up being kind of a spokesperson for PAT.
And
But
that's huge to bring it in and to have it be able to allow the space for that to be developed and being brought here. That's amazing. So
one of my
thank you for
colleagues,
that.
Dr. Ron Hosek, who currently works for this Center for Chiropractic Research, was much more involved than I. And the chief engineer was Dr. Ed Owens, who is now retired from the university.
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much for being a huge piece of the research department. I know that students, faculty, and just research in general through chiropractic and outside of it are very grateful to have you with all the different hats that you wear.
Well, we're trying to do something that matters.
You are doing things that matter. Thank you so much. I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day.
Thank you.
Congratulations with all the beautiful things that you've accomplished. And I am so excited to see more of it.
You're very kind to say so. Thank you.
Absolutely. And we'll see you guys in the next episode of Living Life at LifeU. Bye-bye.
Thank you.